I'm investigative journalist Mollye Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hi, I'm investigative journalist Mollye Barrows, and I've been covering crime in Florida's Panhandle for years. Welcome to my series, Gulf Coast Confidential. From murders to mysteries, I explore some of the saltier stories that surface in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf of Mexico. There is certainly no shortage of them, as my co-host Pam Hill certainly knows. Pam's sister, in fact, Sharon Aydelott, was murdered by her own son on Christmas Eve of 2013. And because of that, Pam often joins me on the show. She has a unique perspective on a lot of these cases we talk about on Gulf Coast Confidential. She's a survivor of violent crime, a grief and loneliness researcher, and also a pharmacist. So, Pam, hello.
Hi, looking like a little Valentine, you and I both.
I know. I was trying to figure out what I was going to wear today, and I pulled out the red. I was like, well, Gulf Coast Confidential is a little spicy.
Today.
Certainly.
All the days.
All the days. I know. No shortage of trauma, tragedy, and heartache. I tell you what, whether it's here or anywhere.
I tell you what, it baffles me that each week we can come in here and talk about something new.
I know. And this time we're talking about a new case, but it's certainly not a new type of crime. We're going to talk about a national case involving a father who killed his sons. And you might have heard of this, Chad Doerman. And we're calling this episode Kid Killers. And in Gulf Coast Confidential Conversations, we've been moving towards talking about national crimes as well as local crimes, because sadly, a lot of these national crimes, we have parallel crimes right here along the Gulf Coast. And a lot of the motivations and the social issues behind these crimes are the same wherever you live. So we think it's important to keep the focus on a lot of these crimes that especially impact families. And this is one of the most unthinkable types of crimes that there are. And we have had crimes like this along the Gulf Coast as well as around the country, around the world. But it's parents murdering children. Well, anyone murdering a child is pretty heinous and horrendous, but especially parents who kill their own kids, Pam.
It's just unbelievable. I look at these cases and we read and we study them and try to think what in the world was going on. And we've talked about a lot of things like that. But my frustration with a lot of these cases is that when somebody kills a child or something, especially like in these cases, parents killing a child, we're always looking, what are the mitigating circumstances? What this, what that? We have talked many times about looking for the red flags and the pink flags and just people's abnormal behavior and the psychopathy. When somebody's not acting right, you know it. Get them help.
Or get away from the situation.
Get away from them, that's right. Basically, like in my family, we tried to get my nephew help before he murdered my sister, but his dad took him out of the rehab. So, and that's why I've got these papers here. Write letters, ask for help, this, that, and the other. And we'll talk about those as we go along. But my goodness, it never stops. And I've told you before how I kind of get not aggravated, but perplexed would be a better word, about King Solomon.
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
I sat around and I was like, really? There's nothing new under the sun?
He was so wise. That was his reputation.
Wiser than me. So there we go. There's nothing new under the sun. And unfortunately, here we go with these two cases.
I know. And if you're not familiar with Gulf Coast Confidential or Gulf Coast Confidential Conversations or Pam's case, then you may want to check out Mommy Killer 1 and 2, as well as Murder and Madness and Confessions in the Field House. And we really dive deep into her sister's case. She was killed, again, like I said, by her own son in 2013. The parents had divorced about a couple of years earlier, actually separated, and then the divorce had only been final for a year. And then Brandon showed up on his mom's doorstep while he'd been living with his dad. He'd been showing signs of mental illness. She'd been trying to get him help, and the dad was reluctant. They were not on the same page, to say the least. And so you can relate to a lot of these domestic violence type crimes that we deal with, and that's what we're talking about in part 1 of Kid Killers. It's the case of Chad Doerman, and here's what happened. If you're not familiar, Chad Christopher Doerman, 32 years old, indicted on charges of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and felonious assault in the deaths of his 3 sons. This is as heartbreaking as it gets. 7-year-old Clayton, 4-year-old Hunter, and 3-year-old Chase. He's being held without bail in Ohio at the Clermont County Jail, which is where the crime happened in Ohio. So according to court documents, on June 15th of 2023, his wife called 911 screaming that he had shot her babies. When police got there, body cam footage showed Doerman sitting calmly on his stoop with a rifle next to him. And as they arrested him, he told them, quote, "I ain't gonna hurt you. I ain't gonna hurt nobody." Well, I guess not. His plan had been to kill his kids, mission accomplished. And there he was just sitting on the porch waiting for people to come to get him, apparently.
Well,
so.
and he's talking to grown men with a gun.
That's right.
You're not a little 7, 4, or 3-year-old, or my wife, or my stepdaughter. And he had been known to be a bully, and he was angry every day, the neighbors said.
Exactly. So he was booked into the jail where he allegedly confessed to killing his sons with a Marlin Model HC-22 rifle that he kept in a gun safe next to his bed. And according to these court documents, Doerman came home from work early that day. He asked his wife and boys to join him in the master bedroom for a nap while his daughter was watching TV in another room of the house. And after lying down with his wife and his sons for a bit, Doerman got up, got the rifle out of the bedside safe, inserted a loaded magazine, and shot one of his sons twice. This, again, is according to the court documents. And the mother immediately tried to get help for her son, and she yelled for her other sons to run. At this point, the sister had gotten to the parents' bedroom in time to see her father shoot her brother. And according to court documents, she followed one of her brothers as he ran, and she was screaming for him to keep running. But Doerman allegedly hunted him down in the yard and continued firing until the child was hit and fell. And then to make matters even worse, he walked up to the boy and fired again at close range, I guess, to make sure that the job was finished. And the girl went back to the house. She picked up her other brother, the littlest one, and ran with him. But Doerman is said to have cut her off as they got close to the road. And as he was brandishing the rifle, he demanded that she put her brother down. I think it's interesting that he didn't want to shoot his daughter or the wife. But according to court records, as soon as she put the boy down, he fired, but it didn't go off. Apparently it was out of ammunition, or it seemed to be. And at that point, the boy ran to his mom, who was out in the yard, trying to help the other boy who had been gunned down. And that's when the sister took off and started running toward the nearby Monroe Township Fire Department. And she told a passerby that, quote, her father was killing everyone, according to the court document. That just breaks my heart for that little girl. And back at the house, the mom had picked up the third boy in her arms, and Doerman, they were fighting for him, and Doerman actually bit her, according to the court documents, as he tried to pull the boy away from her. And in the scuffle, she grabbed the rifle, and he shot through her thumb, and that's when she dropped the boy, and Doerman immediately shot him once in the head. So, Pam, a total of 9 shots were allegedly fired that day by Doerman. One boy was shot once. The other 2 children were shot 4 times each. And the daughter was the only child who came out of that situation alive. And as you were saying, a neighbor who talked to a local news channel there said Doerman frequently lashed out at his family. Quote, he was angry every day, the neighbor said. There wasn't a day he didn't yell at his wife and kids out there. And he, quote, treated his wife like SHIT, end quote. So these were planned crimes, according to the investigator. Evidence said that he'd been thinking about doing this since October of last year.
Okay, October. Let's think about this. October of last year, he did this. He chose Father's Day weekend to do this on the 15th, just a month, not even a month ago. He chose that. He had him take the pre-execution nap with him, and then, okay, the first little boy, Hunter, the 4-year-old, that's who he shot first. The oldest boy, Clayton,
7.
tried to run, 7 years old. And I think about this. They said he ran 300 feet. That's a football field. He hunted him down like an animal,
Yes.
And then there he goes between Clayton and the baby that the mom's holding. The gun did jam, and the mom tried to put her thumb over the barrel end. I mean, you're not thinking, you're not going to kill my kids.
Right.
But can you imagine all this going on?
No.
I can't even imagine any of that. And he planned it for Father's Day weekend. These psychopaths plan their murders on holidays, so the people like myself and my family have to suffer every holiday. These are wicked, psychopathic minds.
Yes, I know. It's unbelievable to me. I actually looked up that gun because I have covered so many crimes where guns were used, and I like to understand a little bit more about the weapon. It's one thing if it's a handgun. Sometimes they're automatic, sometimes they're not. But the rifle always interests me that was his choice, especially when you're already killing your children at close range. Maybe it's what he had on hand. But when I looked up that particular type of rifle, the Marlin HC stands for high capacity. So basically, it's a semi-automatic rifle. And you know what they said its ideal purpose is?
What?
It's basically target practice or small game hunting.
Ooh.
And it just broke my heart. And it has a range of 150 yards. So that boy didn't stand a chance.
No, he was well within his small game hunting range.
Exactly.
It is just so unbelievable to me that how Chad Doerman is calm after all this, sitting on his stoop, as you say.
Right.
While the police are walking up to him and yelling at him. And can you imagine how they're having to feel? There's
No.
3 children laying in the yard, and there's a bicycle and some toys and stuff, and they're having to walk up on that. I don't know how they kept from slapping him around or whatever. And I mean, I'm not a violent person, but I mean, he wouldn't get up for them. They're like, get up. They're screaming, get up, get up, get up. And he wouldn't. And that's when he said, I'm not drunk. I'm not going to hurt you. Watch the dog. I mean, he's more concerned about these grown men with weapons.
That's right.
And everything. And just killed execution style his 3 little boys.
I know, who I'm sure worshiped their father like any normal child does. And the person that was put on this earth to protect them and to love them executed each and every one of them. And they saw it coming and they ran and they tried to get away. The first one, my God, I wish none of them had been shot. Obviously, that would be the best situation all the way around. But the first one, at least he didn't have to experience the horror of running from your own murderous, homicidal father.
Right. And I was thinking about that. The thing, and you know, the thing that I have emotional stuckness with, for lack of a better word, is playing out the last moments of my sister's life. I play out the last moments of Hunter and Clayton and Chase in their lives. They were terrified. I get mad when people try to terrify or bully other people. That's just the unkindest thing, being scared. Your last moments on earth, you have to be afraid of your father,
right,
or your son or your husband or your wife. Unbelievable. Just the evilness, the pure, unadulterated evilness.
And to do it in front of their own mother and to do it in front of their own sister, who both were helplessly doing everything they possibly could to rescue these children, but they couldn't. They were overpowered and he was armed and they weren't.
Oh, intentional. That was his MO. He wanted them to suffer. How else do you get back at someone? You find their button. And if their child's that, or their business, or money, or their looks, or whatever, that's the button that people push.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, too, about how he was sitting there on the porch waiting for the police to come. And apparently that's where he had sat as soon as he got done killing them all. Mm-hmm. And he sat there and he watched, according to the court documents, he sat there and watched his wife try to attempt to resuscitate them and save their lives. Obviously, when the emergency crews got there, they tried the same thing and it was helpless. So everybody's traumatized in this. I mean, it's hard enough.
No effect. And that is what sometimes we forget. First responders and people that are coming up, EMTs, police, officials, come up on this most incredulous, unbelievable, unforgettable stuff. You and I've talked to one of the first responders that was at Sharon's, and it hurt him. And people say it's the worst thing they'd ever seen in Santa Rosa County. This is the worst thing that these folks in Ohio had ever seen. I think this is about the lowest thing a person could do.
Yeah, I know, and especially if you're a parent yourself, even if you're not, it's tragic to see little children killed, but to see someone do it deliberately and the person that was supposed to protect them do it. But apparently he made multiple statements to law enforcement when they arrived, and he said, quote, "I did it, take me to jail, I shouldn't have done it, I shouldn't have shot them." And he gave a statement during an audio and video recorded interview, and during time he admitted to having been thinking about his sons shooting them since October, and details also revealed that he hadn't slept for 3 or 4 days leading up to these killings because, quote, the thoughts of having to kill his sons was so heavy on him. And when I read that, it made me think about how he came home early and he laid down to take a nap. So he was trying to get up his energy to do what he'd already planned to do, but it was almost like this was his way of saying goodbye.
Yeah, in his weird, twisted, psychopathic mind. You know, these are little boys that like to stay up late and watch TV, play with Legos and their little bicycles and do baseball. And they said that they all three loved each other and liked to cluster up with each other and copy each other and were goofy little boys.
Yeah,
I can't imagine
fun-loving.
anything better. Can you?
No, of course not. And I just can't even imagine why he thought that was the solution to his problems, how that was going to make his life better in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, he had apparently changed his Facebook profile picture just a few days before the shooting. And he posted, so he had his 3 sons in his profile picture, as well as that background picture that's at the top of your Facebook page. And, you know, it was him at the racetrack, it looked like, with the 3 boys in the background picture. And then it was the 3 sons in his profile picture. And showing one of the boys how to fish. And his dad had just visited. Now, his dad and his wife live in, I believe it's Port Richey, Florida. Yes. So they, one of the national media managed to contact them, and they said that they talked to him briefly on the phone. But he said that he just thinks Chad must have snapped, that he had had no indication that there was anything wrong, that the family was just all very happy when he had seen them a week earlier. However, they went digging into his past, and by his past, I mean Chad Doerman's past, and they found that he had been arrested for domestic violence in 2010 against, guess who? His father, and that the charge was dropped because the victim, in this case believed to be Keith Doerman, the dad, he didn't show up to testify against his son. So eventually the prosecutor's office dropped the charge. And that reporting came from the Cincinnati Enquirer. And when the New York Post got a hold of Keith Doerman, he said that that was not a true report, that it was that he had nothing. I guess he was basically saying it wasn't true that he dropped the charges, that was just something that the DA decided to do. But yeah, I just feel like there's a lot more to that. They're just, and I'm no psychologist, but it just seems to me like if he's killing the sons and is going out of his way not to hurt the daughter, not to hurt the mom, but obviously to wound them, just to expose them to this sort of horror and trauma, this has something to do with daddy issues.
Yeah, or either, right. But then the dad, Chad's dad.
Yes.
He said, basically saying he snapped. I don't buy that. This man's behavior was well known, that he was a hothead, a bully,
right.
Basically a tyrant, a terrorizer, everything. Yeah, and his daddy knew that.
I think so.
But his dad, see, people will do and say some crazy stuff. You got one parent in here, the dad of Chad, saying, oh, my son's, he's minimizing everything. And then the other dad just goes in and kill his little kids. But he was saying, he's a super father. Super? Nope. Father? Nope. Super father? For damn sure,
He's
no.
a super killer.
Yeah. And I mean, that's his grandchildren too.
Yes.
And you know what he's capable of. I think a lot of times people see stuff and say, man, like we talked about, I missed that. Not pink flag, not yellow flag. I missed that red flag on that. And he's just an angry man. And he wants to take it out on people that have no power. I'm surprised, too, that he didn't go after the daughter, the stepdaughter, and the wife. But, I mean, how else can you go ahead and kill me? You hurt me worse by letting me see that and have to live with that.
I'm telling you, that little girl trying desperately to save her brothers, I mean, that just is about as heartbreaking as it gets. And then him making her have to choose, I'm going to shoot you both, is essentially what he was implying. I mean, that's how I took it, brandishing the weapon. She felt like her life was in danger. And to make her have to choose, it almost just too much. It breaks my heart. It just hurts so badly that whole situation, they had to endure that.
And she had such a presence of mind. You could tell
Yes.
she had been like a little junior mommy to the 3 little boys, too, because she intuitively, the fire station must have been very close to where they live, because she ran straight there, and she wouldn't let anybody take her. She wanted to go to the fire department herself.
She didn't want to have to explain it.
Right.
She was trying to be the most efficient she could, is what it sounds like.
Very smart girl.
Yes, and it's interesting too, talking about how parents sometimes react to this. But Keith Doerman apparently told other media that, quote, I could tell in his eyes he's hollow inside. That wasn't Chad standing at the arraignment. That was not him. But and it reminded me a little bit of Brandon Aydelott and his behavior and how he seemed completely checked out. But, when you've given in to your worst instinct, when you've succumbed to those psychotic impulses and those homicidal impulses, it does kill, I think, the section of humanity that may or may not have been struggling to survive inside that soul.
It's unbelievable because they want to hurt people and they want to say they did the right thing.
The power.
And that other people made them or finances or whatever. And they're looking into all that on this case. But it's just so unbelievable to me to have zero affect. My nephew had zero affect except for a few giggles and smirks and laughs about it and then calling my sister the wrong name, calling her maiden name. It's like their brains are just so consumed with the evil and the vengeance and stuff. It's just unreal. And I have to tell you, I watched those policemen jerk him up off that stoop.
I bet they would have liked it done a lot worse.
They would have. And one of them, they just took with him doing all that little soft talking and everything, like he's a little girl or something. And finally, one of them probably acted about like I would act. He said, "Shut up." Like that. He's like, "Shut up, dude. You have the right to remain silent. Use it," like that. And I probably would have told him something else and probably gotten all kind of trouble. But how can they even stand there doing that? But it's still so interesting to me that then when he's in court in what they call that pickle suit, you see him with that almost like straitjacket looking thing. It's green. It's called a pickle suit or a bam bam suit. It's an anti-suicide smock. And
you can't use it to kill yourself?
No, you can't tear it. You can't do anything. You're tight in it and stuff. I watched Chad Doerman stand there and kind of conjure up the tears eventually. And, somebody like that, they were asking for $20 million, for his bail. And someone like that, they're not crying for those children. They're crying that they got caught, and now this is their life.
Yeah, I think it's the fantasy. This is going to be great. I've been thinking about it. Now's the day. I did it. Now the reality of it's hit. And suddenly you don't feel like the big bad man that you thought you were that was going to take care of this problem by either killing your mother in Brandon Aydelott's case or killing your sons in Chad Doerman's case, or in another case that we're going to talk about, Lam Luong, who threw his 4 children over a bridge. It was the same thing. He said that he deliberately killed them in order to get back at the mom. And I do wonder if there isn't some of that here in the Doerman case. Again, leaving the mom and the sister alive. But too, I also will be interested to hear, if any of it comes out at some point, whether it's trial or sentencing, why he focused on killing the boys. What was the problem that he thought that was the solution?
Unbelievable. You're a grown man. They're 3 little boys. Not a single one of them over 7.
Right.
That should, but see, these kind of people with this kind of psychopathy, they don't think about, like, if you or I get frustrated with someone, we think, wait, let me see what my part in this is. Maybe I'm tired, or maybe I'm hungry, or this, that, and the other, and you sure don't operate with hurting a child. So we correct our behavior. And what's been a common thread through every one of these we do, these people, these offenders, these murderers, these killers, these rapists, these pedophiles, they're not ever going to change their behavior. I do what I want, when I want, how I want, and you're going to like it.
And if you don't like it, then I'll punish you too. Yeah. I'll either kill you for complaining, I'll kill you to make sure that nobody can tattle against me and that there's no evidence against me. Or perhaps if you're a parent, or, in other cases that we are familiar with, they'll take it out on the people who are grieving the lost ones. Like, how dare you even be sad?
Exactly. And it just amazes me. I cannot get over him. I cannot get over him with the police. I don't know why that sticks in my head.
I think it's so familiar to you.
I think
also.
so.
I think it sort of reminds you to a certain extent. I remember when Sharon's body was found on Christmas Eve, it was found by her ex-husband. And the police at the scene, as you describe, and your sister Patricia describes, and your other family members describe, the police at the scene, Randy Aydelott was making it, he didn't immediately say, "That's my ex-wife." He was making it like that's the mother of my children. And they had put him in the back of a patrol car, and they were treating him like he was the victim when he had everything to gain by her death, and did gain a lot. But to me, I think that, and he could be aggressive and bullying, and we know that he tried to have an inappropriate relationship with a 14-year-old girl. So in some ways, I think that there is some familiar themes here. And here you have a grown man who doesn't mind using others to meet his own needs, but when he's around other people that are potentially that are equals and beyond him, other men, if you will, that could actually physically hold him accountable and maybe possibly even intimidate him on another man level, then he wants to obey. Then he wants to acquiesce. Then he wants to be a victim. And that's kind of what I feel like this Doerman cat was doing.
I think that's very insightful of you, because I think that's true. Because, like, the mother and daughter in this case, the trauma that you live. It's been almost 10 years. This Christmas will be 10 years with Sharon. There are small things, there are big things, there are things that other people wouldn't expect that, for lack of a better word, initiate my trauma to where other people may or may not even know I'm going through it. You've seen me before. I'll just start breathing deep or get scared or, like that, almost like a panting little animal, because that same emotion, most of the time you go back to your worst trauma when you're, for lack of a better word, triggered or initiated with that stuff. So, I mean, it wears you out. And I think that's why I go back to that. You're exactly right. And I think that's why in my heart, I feel so sad for those 3 little boys, but I know that, they are in heaven, and I know that I'm not minimizing what happened to them. I can empathize and sympathize with them. That one running the length of a football field.
I know, trying to outrun a gun with a killing range of 150 yards. I mean, and the fact that he walked up to him and made sure.
Finished him off.
Unbelievable. I hope that he was already gone at that
I do
point.
too. But I mean, when you're running a football field, and we've all run a football field, it takes a minute. You're running it, and the whole time,
bless him,
little baby's running. He's like, my dad's trying to kill me. I got to outrun. I got to go. I can't go back and save my brothers. I can't run in my mom or my sister. He's on his own. I'm so mad I want to cuss right now.
I understand. Well, there's just and I can't even imagine, like you're talking about with the law enforcement reaction. I found some other news outlets that had reported when the police released the body cam footage of when they got him to the jail. So they remove him from the car and they bring him, basically into the Sally Port where they're checking him in, how they have one room at a time, unlocking the doors one room at a time. So he's in this initial room, and he immediately walks over to the wall and starts banging his head against the wall. And you hear this one officer say, don't do that. Nuh-uh. And I thought to myself, yeah, because I'd like to do that for you,
Or how about you did this before you killed everybody?
Right. That's one thing that always has gotten me. I remember years ago, I was telling you about this. It was late 1990s, and it was off of Highway 98 here in the Florida Panhandle. That's between Gulf Breeze and Navarre, if you're familiar with this neck of the woods. But I remember I was working weekends, and I can't remember if it was a Saturday or Sunday, but a young girl, somewhere around my daughter's age now, I believe she was like 10 or 11 or 12, her father, and he may have even been her stepfather, but he just got up and started killing the whole family, killed her mom, killed her siblings. But she ran before he got to her, and as she's running down the street, she ran around the corner to a convenience store. This is the day before, times before cell phones, and you had to go to a payphone, and she ran around to the corner convenience store and used the phone there to call 911 and basically reported that her dad had killed their whole family, and she was the only one to survive. And then he killed himself. And I thought, if that's the end game, how about do us all a favor and kill yourself first before you take out the whole family?
This is the psychopathic thinking of terrorism. It upsets me so much when I see people doing that to people at work or at out when I'm buying something, people talking so disrespectfully. We have to quit all that. We've normalized that where people think
hatefulness.
Yeah, if they want to say what they want to say or do it, there are consequences. Unfortunately, the offender hardly ever has to pay them, and they're the ones popping up 5 or 6 years later going, hey, let me out, or 53 years later like Leslie Van Houten. Right. Look, the cost was too high. The cost of doing business in your world cost a human life. No, there is no redemption for that. I'm not saying, I don't know how I feel about the death penalty. Some days is one way and some days another. But I think as a rule, I'm like, look, just stay in jail forever.
Yeah, me too. I feel like if God gave us life, he can take it away. And he certainly knows when somebody's committed something horrible in a crime. But we do live in this country, and, even though our justice system has a lot of flaws, it's the best of the worst when you see what happens in other countries. At least we have a chance to be heard, but you do have to fight to be heard, as we know. And that's another reason we do talk about these cases on Gulf Coast Confidential Conversations, is because it is about giving victims a chance to be heard, because it's not just the crime that hurts them one time. It's living with the crime. It's having to have that crime brought up time and time again, as you know, because your sister's case, Brandon comes up for evaluation every 6 months because he was found not guilty by reason of insanity in the eyes of the law. He's not guilty of shoving knives into his mother's eyes. He's not guilty of slamming her face with a baseball bat to the point that her teeth and parts of her jaw were flung across the room. He's not guilty of stomping her face with the brand new pair of Vans shoes that she bought for him. So in the eyes of the law, he's just a person that snapped, as Keith Doerman said about his own sin. And it's just a matter of, getting him to the point where he can be reliable enough to take care of himself. But that's a nightmare for your family. It's a nightmare for other families who've had to suffer these kinds of losses. And then just to have it, there's no peace, whether it's a missing persons case or somebody who hasn't been arrested yet for an unsolved crime. It's this feeling of like, well, what's next? What happens? Why has my loved one been forgotten?
Right.
And it's like Sharon doesn't matter anymore, even though she had this violent death.
And everything's always about Brandon or Chad Doerman or whomever.
And they're
and they're right. Leslie Van Houten, this, that, and the other. And that is not right. It's not. It's not morally right. It's not academically right. It's not legally right. But it's just like when there's a troublemaker around in the mix of someone, all the attention goes to the troublemaker, and other people just know how to behave. But I'm telling you, normal people cannot fathom this, and praise God for that. I couldn't fathom any of this until it happened to my family. I have an empathetic heart and could try, but that's why we talk about it a lot, is because almost like if there was a segment, it's like, you ain't gonna believe this.
I know. Guess what happened?
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, and we always try to find a little bit of a silver lining. And in this case, the community came together at the end of June, and they held a service to remember the boys. And it was at First Baptist Church of Glen Est, and they were wearing bright colors at the request of the family. And here's a quote from one of the folks that attended. "I wish everybody would have had 5 minutes with them just to be able to see how much fun they were." And this came from the boys, or the 7-year-old Clayton's baseball coach, Dwayne Kuhn. He said, quote, "There's nothing that's ever going to take away the time that we got to spend with them. And I cherish every single moment that I was with those boys. I'm just so lucky to have gotten to know and spend the time that I got to spend with them. It's going to be a tough road ahead, but if we keep getting the support and the community coming together, I think we will get through this," end quote. And the association, Pam, also held a memorial for the boys on a baseball field, and they sold T-shirts with all the proceeds going to the family. And one of the other members of that baseball league said the daughter had actually reached out to them and said that she wanted to play in the tournament for her brothers, and to remember them. So that'll be an outlet for her, and she will have hopefully that community support from other people who are hurting and suffering and know them too. So there's this feeling of, you're not alone. You're not in it by yourself.
Right. And I mean, like, it's such a big thing, and other people, everybody has to move on, even Alexis, even me. People have to move on. But, you have people every now and then go, "Hey, you ought to about be over that by now." Never get over it. You will get through it. And there will be things to remember. And that's why memorials and vigils are so important. I cannot tell people enough thanks for that did the vigils and memorials, and people still send me notes about Sharon. I see people out places, and I go to her grave. I see little figurines and stuff that people leave. So we say this all the time. Keep doing all the sweet stuff for families. They need it. The little memorials, I saw so many teddy bears and cuddly toys and cars. It reminded me of Gannon's over there, but it was much, much bigger. So there's still children. They still were sweet and beautiful, and praise God for memorials and sweet people.
I know. And sadly, we've done other episodes talking about children who've been killed. Gannon Stalk was killed by his stepmother, and we've talked about that. You can find more of those details in Unwanted Baggage, and as well as there was one that you and I talked about it as well for Gulf Coast Conversations, Confidential Conversations. And then also Naomi Jones with another little girl who was kidnapped and killed by a pedophile in her neighborhood. And there was a memorial for her as well. So, it does give people a chance to show their support, their love, and their grief for these tremendously tragic events that happen. And in this case, I certainly do hope that that little girl gets some help, and the mom too. I just don't know how you pick up and go on after that, just one day at a time.
Can't imagine.
But Doerman was indicted on 9 counts of aggravated murder 8 counts of kidnapping and 4 counts of felonious assault. He has pleaded not guilty to the charges against him, and he's now being held without bond. Clermont County prosecutor Mark Takulve said it was, quote, an unspeakable tragedy, and he promised that prosecutors would seek the death penalty. And this is what he told media there, quote, my goal is to have this man executed for slaughtering these 3 little boys, Takulve said. It is an incomprehensible act of horror that he perpetrated on this family, end quote. So before we wrap up, and this is part 1, by the way, and we're going to do another case coming up again. I mentioned earlier on Lam Luong, but any final thoughts on Chad Doerman before we...
Yeah, on Chad, in this case in particular, basically, when people show you who they are, believe them. He had to get help for himself. People can't do that for you. People will push your buttons. They see what and who is important to you, and to just keep asking for help. And my last thing that I think about on this is, through all this and hearing the story all the way through, is that people are inherently good, and that thank God for that, and that we need each other. And I pray that they lean on their community and the people that are going to be there for them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pam. And I think that's a great way to wrap up part 1 of Kid Killers. And we want to thank you for joining us for this part 1 of Kid Killers. And in the next story, part 2, we're going to talk about the case of Lam Luong, another father who killed all 4 of his young children because he was mad at their mom. Find out how he did it and how an entire Gulf Coast community took part in searching for their little bodies. That's in part 2 of Kid Killers, the case of Lam Luong. You can watch it as well as this episode and others on my Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel and anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.